For 2 decades, Sarah McKenna has worked at the intersection of automation, data quality, web data extraction, and enterprise-scale data operations. Today, she is the CEO of Sequentum, where she helps organizations turn the open web into reliable, compliant, and auditable data pipelines for market intelligence, competitive analysis, alternative data, and AI workflows. Under her leadership, Sequentum has expanded its AI and cloud-based data extraction capabilities, achieved SOC 2 accreditation, and was named CIO Review's 2024 Enterprise Data Delivery Platform of the Year. Mouthful. Sarah has also contributed to the industry conversations around responsible and ethical web data collection through work connected to the SIIA/FISD, Alternative Data Council. In this episode, we'll talk about web scraping, alternative data, AI compliance, and whatever we get to talk about here. So, Sarah, thank you for joining us in the show. Can you tell the guests a little bit about yourself, who you are, and how you got to work with web data? It's quite an interesting journey from what I remember.
Thanks, Tony. That was a great intro, very flattering. I ended up in automation when I first joined a .com. I took the job that nobody wanted, the thankless, job where you're crossing T's and dotting I's. And I was doing very large-scale automation in the context of software test automation, quality assurance, automating the stand-up, all the DevOps, what became the field of DevOps, automating release engineering, what became the field of release engineering, following agile practices, sometimes defining those practices. And at some point, I had so much experience with all different kinds of technologies that I was recruited into scraping, which is really just the flip side of the coin from test automation. And that's when I really realized, wow, this is an enormous field. And instead of being, someone in the back office managing the most thankless area, I could go into the front office and go into business. I've always wanted to go into business, and my original job was actually at a hedge fund, and I left there to join .coms, thinking I was going to be an entrepreneur. And so when I went full circle and ended up in scraping, um, I realized the all data world and how decision intelligence was driven by data and by web data, and how all of a sudden I had this tremendous expertise to influence an entire industry and an entire movement in the tech world. Not just at the time, it wasn't all about driving AI, it was about driving decision intelligence. But now that we have AI agents, it's really all about driving this new agentic world. So it's a very exciting place to be. Thank you. Thanks again for that intro.
It must be very interesting to have witnessed like how well the field of DevOps, the field of data, the field of scraping has changed throughout these years. Maybe can you tell me one thing that you were definitely not expecting that it will be like the way it is today?
I mean, I think way back in the beginning of my career, we used to advocate for agile practices and test-driven development and all of these validations and verifications and all of this automation to minimize risk and to eliminate all of these firestorms that these teams were living through, which were so common back in the day. And when I came into data, I was amazed to realize that this sort of shift left philosophy and approach that we always took was something that was just de rigueur, required upfront. And there was an entire industry of data engineers and data professionals who were equally obsessed with all of those best practices and all of those principles that we held so close. Um, so it was just really, really great to come into a field where what we always advocated for and, what we, tried so hard to push and we're sort of seen as, the annoying quality assurance people, right, was something that was front and center, mission critical. And now we've come full circle where trust, transparency, and auditability and all of those best practices, even of IT security and governance, those are all front and center. and driving everyone's decisions in procurement and in business. It's really, really exciting.
Interesting.
What you're saying is trust is at the core of it all.
It's very hard to drive trust, right? If you're thinking about decision intelligence, and basically that's what we're all after now, right? We want these AI agents to be able to make choices. We want to enable them to make decisions that improve our lives, that drive our productivity. But we want to do it in a way that we can trust. And that's sort of the basis of it all, right? And in order to trust it, it has to have guardrails, and it has to have acceptance criteria, and it has to have all of these best practices that we built sort of principle by principle over the years are what is most important today. I mean, it's really people, it's kind of it's not the most exciting conversation in the world to talk about these sort of compliance and these kinds of things. But really, trust is, if you can trust that agent to go and get the best price on that ticket to the destination that you really care about, when it finds that price at 3 a.m, and to actually grab that airplane ticket and that amazing beach spot for you, inside your budget, and to trust that it's going to be able to do the right thing, like that's huge. And I think that's what we're all after. I think that's what we're hoping we're going to get out of this.
Feels to me a little bit similar to driving. Like when cars were first invented, people was like, let's roll them out, make them accessible, teach people how to drive and make them faster. But somewhere in that timeline, they also realized, oh, you know what, we need seatbelts. And I think across industries it happens. And what you're describing is, as data people, are at the point where seatbelts are important.
Such a good analogy, Juan. Like, yes, exactly. Right. We were so excited about cars. Everyone wanted one. It really got us to places that we'd never been able to get to before. But then, of course, there were all of the risks and the dangers. Same with self-driving cars. There's a lot of room for improvement there. There's also pretty exciting developments. But are we really going to get there? And that's the thing about AI also, and AI adoption, is we do have a problem in our industry with trust. And it's not just that there are known ways that these things are falling down, and real problems with data quality, or the way that the data is sourced, or missing guardrails, or whatever it is. People do fear the changes coming from AI. And so the trust is, again, just front and center. It's so important.
You know, you remind me of something. I think it's very hard to find people like you that are so interested in governance and that do it well, because it's an unusual profile. Being a technologist, that is a little bit about like breaking the rules and pushing boundaries and see how far you can get, but also the governance side to work. My question to you, because this is something I think a lot, is what makes a person really good for a job in governance?
I mean, I think you need to see the big picture. Like, the business is the most important priority, right? But then you also need to be able to sort of bring to bear all of those details, so that you can pull together a complete risk profile and make sure that you're doing right by the business, by permitting and fueling and speeding and greasing the wheels of exactly what that business is trying to do. And that's where the real governance comes to play. Like, you want to make sure the business is fully enabled to operate safely and sustainably, in a way that's not going to bring risk and liability. So it's the big picture and the ability to sort of bring all of those small details together and to bear.
So yeah, if anybody listening to this hears that, I think governance experts are the true unicorns in the data world.
I actually think that it's taking over everything, right? We have AI coding for us, right? So that's sort of, AI is most successful in the coding space, right? It's text, and you have developers and people who understand, how these things fall down, and they have all these governance things already. We already built, the SDLC rules and code reviews and how to deal with DevOps and builds and, all of these security reviews. We already have all that stuff in place. So it's pretty well defined. So AI adoption for coding is pretty broad. So what's the problem with AI coding? The problem is that it's just producing too much code too quickly and humans can't review it. And, I was just having a conversation with someone yesterday. Again, it feels like this ability to see the big picture and all the details is really, really critical at this time, because the way that you review a tremendous amount of code produced by AI is by making sure that it adheres to all those best practices, produces all the documentation, produces all the unit tests, passes all the unit tests, integrates with the testing frameworks and the governance frameworks, OWASP rule, et cetera. All the kinds of things that we used to manually write test plans for. The AI tools can create those frameworks and create those requirements and create that sort of governance that then gets automatically generated with the code. And that just speeds the human comprehension and review and approval. And so again, it's like the AI, I think, is taking a lot of the brute force manual mind-numbing work that is not really human friendly, putting into the hands of the machines, but then again under reinforcing the human in the loop role of ultimately deciding if this makes sense or not, because the AI obviously it's not really there in terms of common sense. It makes pretty big errors, which are surprising sometimes.
An angle like trying to keep AI in check when you're building your own stuff. It's what's training you to become better at governance. Never thought about it, but I guess it tracks.
It's the same theme everywhere I look. It just feels like the convergence of everything, where governance and automation and all those best practices are all coming together. I mean, if you look at something like co-work and how co-work is structured, it's literally piggybacking off all of the best practices of automation, large scale automation, having all of those atomic, uh, pieces of that automated universe all sort of defined, living in context files. You have all different MD files for different aspects of the ultimately what's governance, and creating those guardrails and shape and enabling that productivity and taking it from, when it's raw, it's like 70% correct. But when you start to add in all of this governance and all of the structure, and all these guardrails, you can really get up to incredible accuracy, which is, again, and it's also self-reinforcing because it's also those structures are also feeding back into the training of the AI, and so that it's more accurate over time as well. So it to me, I mean, I guess it's almost like, the paradox of, you perspective is what you see everywhere. So I think that's probably what's going on too. Yeah. I see it all as one giant governance framework.
See a kind of hubris when it comes to new class of automation engineers nowadays thinking, I got Claude, I have all this velocity, I'll just put my scrappy web scraping tool, connect with Claude, put some guardrails up, and bada bing, bada boom, I have a business, it's running. Obviously, what you're describing is quite a bit above that. So for the people listening in, I think it's very interesting to dive into like what does it exactly look like? What does a company like Sequentum do and execute really well on that might be like really hard to do as an individual or small team?
So one thing I will say about, like, when you say the hubris of people who are so excited about all this automation, back in the day, we called that fragile. Instead of agile practices, they were fragile practices. People got really gung ho and excited, and they thought that this automation was great, and they were actually missing all of the main problems that the automation was supposed to surface, and it ended up being very fragile. So if you didn't do it the right way, you would end up with tremendous lapses, which is how when I look at AI as 70% correct, I'm like, well, they haven't really put in all of the structures that they need to make sure that it doesn't do that. And so what we do at Sequentum to try to implement the best practices and make sure that we're not going off the rails in our automation is, first of all, we have a platform, and it has all of the features built into the platform that are sort of reusable commands. And that's one big best practice in large scale automation, is to make sure that all your commands are sort of atomically maintained, so that if this little thing changes over here and you need to edit it, you don't have to edit thousands of agents. You only edit it in one place, and everything else benefits from that change. So for example, we deal with a lot of bot blocking and web scraping, and that's just a matter of, anonymizing a lot of objects in the browser is what it's come down to, really. And so, if we're blocked, maybe there's a new variable that some bot blocking company has introduced, and we need to introduce on our end, but we'll put it in one place. And in the agents themselves, you can use AI now to decide how to unblock, or you can manually configure and explicitly say, I'm willing to do this, I'm not willing to do that, et cetera. But these are sort of built-in features and atomic controls. And we have that for everything. Loading a URL. If the internet changes, if the IETF comes out with new HTTP standards or whatever it is, we will maintain that command in one place, and all agents will benefit from that. So that's a huge sort of, best practice that we have, this reusable platform. And then we have a low-code interface, and that allows you to, point and click and very quickly and visually write your agents and review them, so that any stakeholder, even the non-technical ones, can see exactly what's happening. If this workflow is driving decision intelligence for a business, it's driving that business decision making, there's a lot of stakeholders that need to trust that, and building that transparency is a huge best practice in and of itself, allowing people who are not technical to go in and see exactly how something changed, who changed it when and how, really goes a long way to drive trust. So we build that in as well. A third best practice is we have custom command templates. We have command templates and we have agent templates. And what this does is, if there are any sort of routines that are specific and custom to a business, maybe not a command like loading a URL, but maybe it's something about how you map hotel data internally, right? Or how you write out your data internally, right? Those are specific to your organization, or maybe even your team. You can write those in command templates that are versioned independently. So we have commands that are reusable, that are built into the platform, but you can write your own custom command templates that you can also bring to bear, and they're versioned separately. And similarly with agent templates as well. If you have a specific template for collecting job data, for example, it has specific schema, a specific way of mapping and classifying. You can write an agent template for that, and then you can use that for all of your job data collection agents. And there's just so many best practices that we've built into our platform. Obviously, logging and troubleshooting has to be extremely easy. You have to make it so easy to understand that something is not working the way that you expect. So we have built-in acceptance criteria. We have all of these automated checks at the level of every field, of every row of data that comes across. You can configure, just innumerable numbers of rules and validations. But to cut down on the noise of having too strict rules, we also have sort of a overall sort of tolerance thresholds that you can set in terms of the number of errors that you would expect, how many rows of data, compare it to more recent runs. Am I getting similar, volumes of data? Am I getting similar numbers of, Hondas, or like whatever the thing is that you're collecting? You have this tolerance threshold, so it's not too noisy. And then the last thing is, you need to really make it easy for people to not only take ownership of problems as they arrive, but to know the moment something has gone wrong. So you have this built-in validation and tolerance threshold, so it's not too noisy. But then you have alerts and notifications that are meaningful, right? So the right person gets notified in the right time frame that something has changed. We work in web data. We work with web data, right? Websites change, Cloudflare takes the internet down. There's all kinds of things that go on, right? If this data is driving your mission critical business decision making, you better know immediately when it's not coming across as expected. So we have all the alerts and notifications built in where you can communicate exactly what's not meeting acceptance criteria. And then every little change, because we're in web data and the data is so critical, what we do instead of putting a lot of restrictions on the ability of agent developers to fix something, we do the opposite. We make it extremely easy. So we track all the versions of every agent that's in production, right? And anyone can go and see what's where and what changes have been done. And the moment something needs to be adjusted, the right person is notified, and that person can go in, download the latest, point, click, fix, verify against all the existing rules that are in there, and they can deploy. And the check-ins and tracking is under that named human who approved that change to go live, right? Humans make mistakes. Okay, they're not infallible. But if you're talking about a process that requires these just-in-time changes and fixes in production, and you have the audit trails and governance built in to show who did what, where, when, that goes a long way towards trust. So we've built all that in.
Super nice that like you have found so many ways to build trust into your project. I actually want to flip the premise a little bit because I can imagine many people that are listening, they probably are maintaining a code base that it's a mess, there is no trust, and they might be wondering like, what are the first steps that I should take to go into that journey?
I mean, this is again back to sort of agile best practices, and you want to make sure that somewhere you have how it is that the system should behave. Claude I think has distinguished itself with its, what is it, 800-page constitution or something. Maybe your code base doesn't need an 800-page constitution, but you should have some documentation of how you expect it to behave, and then you should have some testing and validation that makes sure that it's actually meeting those those expectations or acceptance criteria, right? I mean, you kind of need to, there's work involved in defining all of that and building the guardrails, but it pays back in spades because you don't have all those fires. It's much easier to introduce a change and an enhancement improvement. You stop focusing on fixing things that broke, right? Things that you already built, value you already added. You stop focusing on that because you automate the processes to make sure that that's still there with each new release, and you just focus on the new functionality. It speeds everything up exponentially. So it's worth the investment.
Goes back to being able to see the big picture and, well, have a vision of what you're trying to build. It's funny how you were so specific about how you expect it to behave, because for those people that are listening don't know, there is the way that your code behaves and how you expect it to behave, and they're rarely the same thing.
But that comes down to sort of the basics of requirements, right? We've always had that problem. Like the user says, I wanted to do this, and the developer understands something completely different. And the reality is that as they're implementing it, there are all these micro choices that the developer is making. And maybe, they're making some assumptions about how this feature needs to work, right? That's always been a problem with software, right? But with these new tools, you can really put a lot of information in terms of how the business user expects it to work and behave. You can really put that in writing, and you can just have the tools develop a lot of that stuff for you, which is a huge luxury. Like, it's obviously a token cost, but again, I think it pays back in spades. And also with security, by the way, the IT security testing that these tools give you is just phenomenal. It's fantastic. And boy, that is really thankless work for humans to do manually.
Can you give us an example? You're talking these tools, cloud, right?
So we use a lot of different AI tools, and we switch back and forth depending on who's ahead in the race. Lately, it's it, it's been a lot of Claude, but not exclusively. But it doesn't really matter. I don't want to talk about the AI tools. I think just
It's a 1 year license.
I mean, when you have AI coding tools doing code reviews from a security perspective, for example, they catch so many things sort of instantly that, a developer is focused on the positive case. My business user said they want A, B, and C, and they have checked in something that achieves that. But they didn't think about the 1,000 different security use cases that, could end up being a disaster in production. AI can do that so easily. And it's just great. And they'll go in and it'll write all your unit tests and it'll document everything and, tell you this is why I'm doing what. And it's our developers, when they first upgraded to enterprise GitHub that has this code review capability, they immediately had me knocking on the door because we went from like, I don't know, $20 a month or something to like $900 a month. I was like, what's this? What are we doing? What have we done? And they just, they know me. They walked me through what these tools are doing, from catching all of these, potential security, issues. And, I was sold immediately. I mean, it's such a low cost to protect against, those kinds of issues. And we're SOC 2 Type 2, and, we're kind of obsessed with security as well as um, so we take this stuff very seriously. We're producing data that's driving major decisions for regulated industries. So it's really, really important to us. But yeah, I mean, use the tools, invest, spend the tokens, get the licenses. Yeah. It's a great time to be a builder.
It's cheaper than human hours.
Times, apparently not according to Microsoft.
It for those who are listening, there has been some recent research by Microsoft indicating that yearly costs on agentic workflows outstrip that of a senior engineer.
Hmm?
So there might be some reckoning coming in the field when it comes to just unlimited token maxing.
I mean, our head of AI and engineering, when we had that original GitHub discussion, what he said was, what you're spending on it is like having another engineer on the team that's going and doing all of this, but the cost of that engineer is so low compared to the risks that it's, totally worth it. But there does have to be budget there for sure. Hmm. We're spending more on AI than I think we ever thought we would. We're really, really appreciating it.
Talking about things we never expected, let's zoom out a little bit in the field of web data. Um, how have you seen the discussions around the internet and the architecture of the internet change with the advent of all this web scraping and agentic workflows? Because there's definitely this sort of tension. It almost feels like red team, blue team. The producers of the data versus the consumers, and then there's the whole medium in between there that is the internet and Cloudflare and all these parties, and they all disagree on what it should be.
Well, this is a very open debate. That's right. This is a very open debate, and I'm very involved. So as you mentioned, I, worked on the web data collection considerations for the Alt Data Council, and that was in the finance industry. And then I went and joined the Alliance for Responsible Data Collection, teaming with Bright Data and a lot of other companies like Common Crawl, and a lot of the sort of public interest groups, and a lot of the big tech companies. And what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that the parties who normally don't raise their hands, the scrapers, are actually represented in the conversation because of cease and desists and the types of lawsuits that happen in our field. Most people don't raise their hand to say, we're scrapers, and we're doing this for very valid reasons, like background check companies. That's a scraping use case. Fighting human trafficking, it's a scraping use case. Anything to do with, investment decision making, or, price algorithms, or yield, optimization algorithms. These are all scraping use cases, and every industry is engaged in this web data powered, mission critical decision making. And so I made a decision when they launched the WebAuth working group, and it was launched by a bunch of people from Cloudflare. Their mission is to make the internet a better place. And their customers, they represent about 20% of websites on the internet. Their customers are having some major issues, right? After ChatGPT came out, it became very easy to have these dumb crawlers go to websites and collect all their data. And they are incentivized to do this because there's tremendous value created from training AI with this data. But the problem is they're really dumb crawlers. So if they go to a website that's getting hammered by a lot of these AI crawlers, and it's giving 503 server errors, right? They're just going to be like, come on, give me the page, give me the page. And the site's never going to be able to come up again. It's like a denial of service attack, right? Companies like Sequentum, like, we would never, ever do that. We would, we would notice immediately the site's having a problem. We would phase back. We have all of these throttles and rate limits and all these things in place to be respectful to the websites. And, but these crawlers don't. And so what's happened? So several things have happened for publishers of data, which we depend on these publishers. And so we don't want anything to happen to them. We don't want anything to happen to the open internet. We're sort of two sides of the same coin. But what's happened is the economy that used to feed them, the ad economy, has broken down, because it's very clear that companies like Cloudflare, who are bot blocking companies, they can't block bots, right? We've always known that they can't block bots because we're a sophisticated platform. But once the AI crawlers came out, the publishers realized there's no way that all of these eyeballs are human. Cloudflare, your bot blocking doesn't work, right? So it used to be that a website would just pay for Cloudflare, and then they could sell ads, because they could say to the publishers, the advertisers, look, we have Cloudflares. All these eyeballs that are looking at your ads are human. And after a while, the advertisers were like, no, they're not. This is not human, and we're not paying for these ads. So there's sort of a crisis, right? Because the internet sites need some sort of business model. And this is why this conversation is so important. I encourage anyone who has a voice at stake in this field to get involved, because these sites deserve to have some economy, right? Especially these public interest sites, they're getting absolutely slammed. They have to pay the cost of serving all of this traffic, right? And then the AI firms that are profiting maybe off of consuming all this data are not paying anything. And so, but then again, all the traditional industries that are driving decision intelligence, they need to keep going, right? You can't not have background checks. You can't not have competitive intelligence, right? You can't wish these things away. They're not going away. And so we're having a big discussion. So there's a global standards body called the Internet Engineering Task Force, and they have a working group called WebAuth. And a lot of the conversations are happening in there. And we have a lot of the publishers in there. We have all the big tech companies. It's a lot of lawyers too. It's not just site owners or engineers. But we have the EU AI Act pointing at some of this IETF work. There's sort of a number of working groups. There's AI Prefs, which is trying to define the vocabulary of how you might define the assets on your site. And then WebAuth is supposed to cryptographically self-identify the agent, and would feed into sort of some concept of toll booths on the internet where you could actually pay for this data. And then there's some other things like Privacy Pass fits into this framework as well, so that researchers or human rights workers, investigative journalists could fall outside of it without being blocked and without being required to pay. And there's I can't get into all of it, but there's a lot of really, really good discussion going on. And the interesting thing from Sequentum's point of view is we believe that a large number, unlike the public interest groups who don't have budget, our customers would, I think most of them would just love to pay to scrape the data that they need to drive their decision making. They would love to be legitimized and not have to worry about potentially being sued by some website for collecting their data on a daily basis. And so we've actually integrated a digital wallet into our platform. And we're sort of unusual that way because we're a web automation platform and we do web scraping, but we ended up getting pulled into this agentic commerce world because we're not blocked and our web automation works really well. It's 18 years mature and we have all this trust and governance and auditability built in. And so we were pulled in by the KYA pay sort of, I don't know if you want to call it a cabal. There's all these competing protocols for agentic commerce. But we integrated with them and we are the hands of the checkout, which is kind of an interesting place to be because that's actually a much bigger market than web scraping. So it's exciting. But yeah, so there's a lot of conversation going on there. So we're already cryptographically self-identifying our agents for agentic commerce, but we're still, sort of bypassing all the bot blocking controls, even with those agentic checkouts, because the sites don't know how to turn it off for some and not for others. They don't have that capability and probably won't for many, many years. And then, of course, for other data collection, like background check companies, like they have to fight bot blocking in order to get data that the government is mandated to provide. So we're engaged in that as well, sort of defeating the bot blocking and from our sophisticated platform in order to facilitate these regulated industries and good practices. So it's a very interesting place to be.
Very interesting that you guys landed in this sort of AI wallet space of agentic commerce. It's almost like you guys are building a Visa or MasterCard of like paying for your web data, right? As like the middleman. It's very interesting. I never considered that to even like being a segment in that market.
The thing you have to understand is just like entities that are scraping get cease and desists, platforms and publishers that facilitate scraping are also getting cease and desists. And so far, we don't have any websites that are willing to allow us to pay them to scrape. So we've got the capability, but we don't have any publishers who are willing. It's very interesting. They want to sell their data directly, but they only have so many humans to negotiate, like Reddit, for example. Think about Reddit. Like they can negotiate a deal with OpenAI, sure. But what about the long tail of everyone on the internet that wants, some little tiny slice of data to feed into whatever it is that they're building? They have no way of doing that. So we're ready. If that starts to emerge, we're ready. And in the meantime, we're immediately seeing this upsurge in consumption for the agentic checkouts, which we weren't expecting. It's not something that we were thinking of or planning for. Yeah, it's interesting.
Super funny how we have been saying that data is valuable and selling your data and your best asset for decades now. But then I also hear from you that you're so deep into that space that that infrastructure to actually sell the data doesn't exist. And even funnier is, well, all of you, let's say the users, the people interested in purchase it, that are co-defining and co-creating this space. That's a really funny situation to think about it.
Absolutely fascinating. I mean, literally everything is changing. AI has disrupted everything, it turned everything on its head. And we are in this whole new world and finding our way. And obviously, you need to adapt quickly because everything is changing. And so we're adapting too. We are an 18-year mature platform, and we've integrated AI so that we have, AI agent generation. Now you can use natural language to generate an agent, but that agent is still deterministic, right? Our customers who are regulated, they do not want AI at runtime deciding what the price is and what the tax is and whether or not this person, has a felony record. No, they don't want that. They want a deterministic agent that does the exact same thing every time. It's completely defensible and auditable. So we are using the AI to drive productivity. We're using the AI to speed development of agents, to automatically configure the unblocker. We have a visual editor that makes it very easy to see what's in the agent, exactly how it's running, and also to point and click and customize it. So it's very, very easy to customize. You don't have to go back and forth with the prompt. And then we have a magic wand in the visual editor. If there's another page that it didn't add and you actually want that page, you can go navigate there using these reusable commands and then the magic wand to generate that section of your workflow. So we're doing a lot with AI, and we're adapting a lot. Obviously, we have a wallet now. That's a big shift for us. But yeah, I think it's just a reflection of customer demand and what's happening in the market.
Question on that, and that is, once again, for the people listening that are working with agents and they're like, I wish my agents were a bit more deterministic. How do you start building something like that? I want to hear from your perspective.
Yeah, so we have this advantage in that we have an 18-year mature platform, and the agents themselves are really just a text file that runs on the platform. So really, we have all of the ability to define what an agent does in our platform. So what we're able to do is to give it instructions to generate an agent that basically to generate. It's not really the code for the agent. It's really just the instructions to our platform for exactly what the agent needs to do. So that's why it's deterministic. We can include through custom commands AI decision points, but most of our customers don't do that. They're really just using the AI to speed the development of agents. And they just want it completely deterministic at runtime. It's also so much cheaper. Like an AI decision process in the middle of your web scraper, like it's very slow to read the page. It's very slow to comprehend. Again, it's 70% wrong. 70% right. It's 20 to 30% wrong. So it's expensive, it's slow, it hallucinates, right? You just don't want it at runtime. So we haven't included it in runtime. And so far, we do have a lot of competitors that use AI for self-healing, right? When a website changes and you have to adjust. And we're not doing that. So far, none of our customers have said they absolutely want it, because again, they have trust problems. But I think we may end up adding in like a feature to automatically generate a new version of the agent and store the data collected off to the side, just in anticipation that a human will come in and approve that self-healed edit. I think we may do something like that, instead of directly self-healing and just having the agent doing whatever the AI told it to adjust to. But yeah, it's a very interesting thing. And the deterministic agents are like fractions of a penny to run versus dollars of using AI.
And to add to that, right, like anyone that has worked in one of these heavily regulated industries and has been personally responsible to make sure that they're compliant knows inherently you cannot come to a regulator saying, well, I have a black box and it'll be 70% right and we're not sure what it does during runtime all the time, but yeah, just trust me, it's gonna work.
Or it's like so cool. Oh my God, I vibe coded this demo. Look how great it looks. It's so exciting. It's like, no, that's a nightmare.
This in healthcare, I've done a bunch of things in healthcare, and I recall very vividly when we were doing diagnostic tests, if we were to change one thing about the software, even if it's a version of a package, technically speaking, if we read the law by the letter, you would have to go to the regulator and say, let's reapprove this, which nobody wants to do. Very time consuming and expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, healthcare is really, really tough. We have customers in healthcare too. They use our software on-prem. I don't envy them. It's really tough. But that's your world, right?
It does keep you up at night. You do have to think about governance, yes.
They do learn a lot about sysadmin.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, these new AI tools make the governance easier because that's the thing. Like they're so good at pulling together all these details as long as you've got some human who's making sure it's not doing things that are too, overbearing or, really hampering the business or, just you've got to have that human, sophisticated sort of common sense. That I don't think the AI tools really have that yet, but they've got tremendous ability to pull together all those details in a way that is just incredibly thankless for a human to do manually. Such a boon.
We'll say if you have a large data warehouse or database or anything like that, just through sheer statistics, if you push an agent on that and do your governance, it's still going to be wrong 30% of the time, as you say, and you can give it to a human for review, but the throughput becomes the problem because nobody is saying like, oh, we want to have AI agents run. It's going to be the cost of one extra engineer, and let's hire 3 more to check the work of that engineer. Nobody does this.
Right, we joke about the Hotch Watcher. You know the Dr. Seuss book where they talk about the Hotch Watcher. It's a big long rhyme, and it's basically there's someone who's watching the bee to make the bee work harder so that the plants grow better because and then it's like there's someone who's watching the watcher, and there's this hilarious Dr. Seuss thing where there's like basically all these people like standing there like but yeah, I mean it's hopefully we can use the tools to help us define all those guardrails and align on what matters, and then eliminate, if there have to be all those watchers, like let the AI be the watchers, but let them all be discreetly defined and in a way that the human can kind of oversee. Yeah. I don't know.
Funny thoughts about agents overseeing other agents.
Yeah. Well, I think you could do that with guardrails, right? I mean, that's like the idea of the agents checking code review and checking against all of the security best practices. That's, it's just so brilliant. That was always so hard.
Summary, she's just going to have an 18-year-old mature platform and anything's possible.
They're biased in thinking that, but who knows? There's a lot of good stuff going on out there.
For everybody listening in, what is next for you? Where can people find you?
Well, we're at sequentum.com. You can write to sales@sequentum.com. You can contact me, sarah.mckenna@sequentum.com. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And we're quite active actually. We have a newsletter there, and we post almost daily. What we're up to and what our thoughts are and what's happening. Happy to engage. DM me anytime.